Living things must adapt to survive in the environment or place that they live, so this means that they must develop special features so that they can survive in their particular habitat.
In and around salt marshes, animals and plants must cope with extreme conditions like being exposed to the hot sun when the tide is out, being dislodged by waves, and being exposed to different predators.
Today we're going to be talking about 3 animals and plants that we commonly find around Yorkshire's salt marshes and look at the adaptations that they've developed to allow them to survive.
Shore crabs have a hard exoskeleton shell that offers it protection from the pounding waves when the tide comes back in. This also offers them protection from predators that want to eat them, like other crabs, fish, and birds. Shore crabs vary considerably in colour, from greens to reds, and this is dependent on where they're found, to better blend with their surroundings. This particular shore crab is a green colour to camouflage amongst the seaweed and grasses, making it difficult for predators to find it. Another common animal you will find around salt marshes and on mudflats are lugworms. Unlike crabs, they have a soft, flexible body and make burrows for protection from predators and the elements. Lugworms can be detected on the surface of the mud by their characteristic cast or faecal mound. This is waste material and silt that has passed through their gut. They feed by sucking algae, organic matter, and microorganisms into their burrow when the tide is in. Water is also drawn into the burrow so they can extract oxygen using their simple gills. Enough water is held in the burrow and surrounding mud to keep them alive when the tide is out. The lugworm will stay safe deep down in its burrow when the tide is out. Occasionally, it will come near to the surface to excrete a cast, and this is when it can be vulnerable to being eaten by wading birds using their long beaks to probe deep in the mud. When the tide comes back in and they're covered in water again, they begin to feed by munching on the fine mud and silt. Even when the tide is in, the worms are vulnerable to predators each time they go to the loo, as fish such as cod and flounder can detect them and usually bite their tails off. Luckily, the worms will grow back a new tail in a matter of days. When the tide eventually goes back out, the lugworm will stay deep in its burrow and happily digest the previous tide's meal.
So it's not just animals that have had to adapt to survive in these harsh conditions on the salt marshes, but plants as well. They have had to develop a variety of special features to be able to cope in these conditions.
This is a salt marsh plant called glasswort. It needs firm mud or silt to root into and needs to be very flexible and strong to stay there. Its roots are salt resistant, so it can grow in places other wetland plants cannot. It has an advantage here as it is not shaded out by other plants. Glasswort has a fleshy stem and scaly leaves that can store lots of water so it doesn't dry out in the often harsh, salty and dry conditions it lives in. Related to cacti, it changes colour from green to red through the seasons, from spring to autumn.
Today we've only focused on a few animals and plants that live here, but there's actually much more wildlife. Why don't you go and explore yourself the animals and plants that live here and their adaptations?